The laughter started softly, like someone testing the edge of a memory they weren't sure they should touch. It rolled down the table, bouncing off polished plates and the faint clink of silverware. My eldest was the first to speak, voice half dipped in wine, half in that new kind of confidence money seems to print on the tongue. "Dad," he said, shaking his head with a grin that had too much distance in it. "You've really got nothing left, huh? I mean, not even the shop." The room joined him. It was polite laughter, but hollow, the kind that sounds like applause after a bad performance. My daughter stirred her coffee slowly, not looking up, as if stirring was her excuse for silence. Across from me, her husband, a man whose handshake was always damp, smiled like a spectator at a harmless sport. And I, sitting at the head of the table that I'd built with my own hands 40 years ago, smiled too. You learn something about wood after half a lifetime shaping it. It never forgets where pressure was applied. Every knot, every bend, every scar, it remembers. Humans, I've come to believe, aren't much different. The lawyer, seated quietly at the far end, pretended to be occupied with his napkin. He was waiting for the cue. The part where silence takes over and someone finally asks what's really going on. But for now, I let them have their moment. Let them feast on what they thought was victory. The smell of roasted lamb hung heavy in the room, mingled with the sweetness of apple pie cooling on the counter. Candlelight glowed off the wooden beams I'd sanded myself. The same beams that once echoed with the laughter of children who thought sawdust was snow. I'd dreamed this dinner once. Not exactly like this, but close. I used to imagine us gathered in peace, generations beneath one roof, stories passed around like bread, but dreams, like promises, wear down when they rub too long against reality. When the laughter finally dimmed, I reached for my glass, raised it slightly, and said, "You're right." It went quiet. "You're right," I repeated, voice steady. "I've got nothing left." The eldest leaned back in his chair, smug in the way only certainty allows. "Well, at least you're honest about it now." Honest, the word hung in the air, and for a second, it felt like a weight pressing against the ribs. Honesty had built this family. Honesty and calloused hands. I'd spent my life teaching them that the only inheritance worth anything was integrity. I see now that lesson never took root. It just drifted through their ears like sawdust through sunlight. The lawyer cleared his throat gently. His voice was polite, crisp, like folded paper. "If I may," he said, "before dessert, there's one final document to read." And just like that, I saw the flicker, the nervous glance, the small shift of chairs, the subtle retraction of laughter. But that, I'll come back to, because to understand what happened at that table, you'd have to know how we got there. I wasn't born into wealth. I was born into work. My father was a mason. My mother, a nurse, who believed prayer could mend what medicine missed. The first thing I ever built was a birdhouse. I was 12, and the angles were wrong. The roof slanted, and the nails bent sideways like they were dodging commitment. But when I hung it from the old oak tree, a robin landed on it anyway. That moment stayed with me. It taught me that imperfection, handled with care, could still serve a purpose. That idea built my life after high school. I opened my first carpentry shed behind a rented house. I started with small jobs, chairs, window frames, the occasional repair for neighbors who still believed in barter. A pie here, a sack of flour there. Every piece I made, I signed with a small mark. Nothing fancy, just an X carved beneath the surface. My father once said, "Son, you sign your work with your life. Every mark counts." And so, I did. Years passed. The shed became a shop. The shop became a small business. A name people knew. Families would walk in not just to buy furniture, but to talk, to breathe in the scent of pine and varnish, to watch the hum of creation in real time. Then came marriage. Love wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, like the sound of sanding wood in the morning. She was steady, gentle hands, sharp mind. Together, we built not just a home, but a rhythm. The children followed. I remember holding them both in the same arm, one newly born, one barely walking, both believing I could fix anything. For a while, I almost believed it too. But time, I've learned, has a way of hollowing out certainties. The shop grew. So did the children. and with growth comes distance. The eldest went to business school. He said he wanted to expand the brand, though I never thought of what I did as a brand. My daughter studied law. She said it would keep things fair. I believed her. I believed both of them. When their mother passed, the world lost color for a while. The sawdust in my shop looked more like ash, the air heavier, but I kept going, because work, for me, was prayer in motion. They promised to help keep the business alive. Promises are easy to make when grief still softens the heart. But when money started showing up, when clients grew wealthier, when contracts became digital instead of handshakes, the air around them changed. The eldest became obsessed with numbers. He'd say, "Dad, you don't understand scalability." My daughter began speaking in contracts, in clauses and amendments. "You should let me manage your assets properly, Dad. We can protect your legacy." Legacy, another word that means less, the more it's used. One morning, I walked into the office and realized my name was gone from the front side. The new logo reads simply, "The Family Craft Co." I remember standing there, feeling smaller than the dust on the floorboards. They said it was just a rebrand. I nodded, though something inside me quietly closed. I began spending more time alone at the workshop. They stopped visiting. Holidays turned into text messages, birthdays into transfers. The house, once filled with noise, became a museum of silence. Still, I believed there was goodness left in them. I told myself they were just busy, that the world was fast now, that I was old-fashioned. Then, one afternoon, I overheard them talking. They thought I was asleep in the next room. My hearing, they forget, was sharper than ever. "He's signing the retirement papers next week," my eldest said. "Once that's done, we can finally take over the house too. It'll make sense to sell it split, the profit." My daughter's voice was softer, uncertain. "But Dad loves that house." "It's too big for him," he replied. "And besides, he'll have money from the sale." Money, always money. They'd already planned the sale. They'd already decided what parts of my life were worth keeping. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my workshop under the low hum of the bulb and thought about how easily loyalty can be mistaken for weakness. I thought about every nail I'd driven, every splinter I'd pulled, every lesson I'd tried to pass down. I thought about my wife's last words to me. "Don't let the good you built become someone else's." So I decided IWOULDN, single quotes, It began quietly, like all lasting things do. I went to see an old friend, a lawyer, who'd been around longer than any of my tools. We met at a cafe near the courthouse, the kind of place where coffee comes in chipped mugs, and no one bothers to eavesdrop. He listened, didn't interrupt. When I finished, he said only, "You're sure?" "Yes," I said. "I want it all transferred. The house, the business, everything." "To who?" he asked. "To someone who'll remember what it was built for." He nodded. "They'll call you foolish. They already do." We shook hands. No contracts, no ceremony, just trust. A week later, the papers were drawn, the deeds signed, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years, peace. I invited them all for dinner, told them it would be a small family celebration, something to mark my retirement. They agreed quickly, too quickly. I spent the afternoon setting the table myself. I chose the plates my wife loved, polished the silver, lit the candles. Every sound in that kitchen felt like a heartbeat, returning to life when they arrived. They came bearing gifts, wine, desserts, laughter rehearsed for performance. I welcomed them with a smile. The meal was good, the conversation light, but beneath every word lay the tremor of something waiting. And that's where we returned back to the table, back to the laughter, back to the quiet before revelation. Because dessert was ready. The lawyer unfolded the papers. The eldest straightened, still certain this was about inheritance. My daughter froze, spoon midair, and I smiled, because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't building anything new. I was finally finishing something old. The night after that dinner, I didn't sleep. Sleep, at my age, is rarely full anyway. It comes in fragments, like old film reels, cutting in and out of light. But that night, even the fragments were too sharp. The laughter stayed. It clung to the walls, to the curtains, to the wood grain of the table. Every sound in the house seemed to echo it. Even the clock ticking in the hallway had a cruel rhythm, as if marking time between humiliation and the next heartbeat. I sat in the workshop until dawn, the lamp humming over me, the smell of varnish still in the air. There's something about the smell of wood polish. It's both alive and fading, like memory. My father once told me that silence is the sound of dignity repairing itself. That line has followed me my whole life. But that night, silence wasn't repair, it was autopsy. I kept seeing their faces. My eldest, laughing like I was the punchline to a joke he didn't write. My daughter, trying not to meet my eyes, her shame half hidden behind a practiced smile. Her husband, nodding along, like cruelty, had become a polite dinner topic, and I wondered, when did they stop seeing me as their father and start seeing me as an obstacle? Maybe it was gradual, like water eroding stone. You don't notice the hollow until it's too deep to fill. I thought back to when the eldest was 10. He wanted a treehouse, something grand, with a window and a rope ladder. We worked for weeks. Every evening after my shifts, I'd meet him in the yard, hands raw, eyes tired, but heart full. He'd hand me nails, ask questions, tell me stories about how he'd live up there someday. When it was done, he stood on that shaky floor and yelled, "This is mine." I remember smiling, not realizing that one day he'd say the same thing about everything I'd ever built. And my daughter, when she was little, she'd sit on my lap while I drew sketches of new designs. She'd hold my pencil sometimes, tracing over my lines, saying, "You make everything straight, Dad." I told her, "No, sweetheart, the trick isn't making it straight, it's knowing when to stop before it bends." Funny how advice meant for furniture turned out to be a warning for life. Grief changes its shape over time. When their mother died, I thought we'd become closer, that the loss would bind us. I thought shared pain could be a bridge. Instead, it became a border. She was the glue. She was the laughter. She was the one who softened their edges when my own grew too sharp. Without her, the house grew cold, in places no fire could reach. I remember her funeral, the way the sun hit the stained glass, painting our faces in color she would have loved. I remember holding their hands as they cried. But even then, I saw the shift beginning. The eldest had already started looking at the ledger of her estate. My daughter was already talking about legal paperwork. They weren't being cruel, they were just becoming efficient. That's a danger of the world today. Efficiency looks too much like progress. For me, progress had always been slower. It sounded like hammer to nail, like saw to plank. It smelled like pine, like patience. It didn't live in bank accounts or boardrooms. It lived in the echo of honest work. But they grew up in another rhythm. Screens, numbers, speed. They learned to measure life in margins, not memories. In the weeks leading to that dinner, I had spent more hours in my workshop than I had in years. Not working, just sitting, touching things that still felt honest. There's a stool in the corner oak, simple, sturdy. I built it when I first opened the shop. Over the decades, the seat's edges have been worn smooth by years of hands, elbows, stories. Every scratch on it has a reason, a history. It's strange. Howard listens better than people. Sometimes, I'd find myself talking to the empty air. I'd tell her my wife about the children, about how they were doing well, how the business was thriving, how I was proud. I'd lie to her, just to keep her peaceful where she rests. But that night, after the dinner, I stopped lying. I told her the truth. I told her they had forgotten the language we spoke when we built our life together. That the things we taught them about respect, about gratitude, about decency, had been translated into something unrecognizable. I told her, they laughed, and then I cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly. The kind of crying that doesn't need tears to hurt. The next morning, I went for a walk. The town was waking up slow. The diner across the street smelled of bacon and old coffee. The postman waved like he had every day for 30 years. People still knew my name here. The world, in its small way, still remembered who I was. I walked past the lumberyard, past the church, down to the lake. The water was still, the sky gray. It reminded me of a phrase I once read. Asterisk, still water runs deep, but it also hides what's beneath. That's when I knew. I couldn't change who they'd become, but I could remind them who I was. Not through anger, not through shouting, but through quiet truth. You see, anger fades, but truth settles in the air like sawdust. It lingers. You can sweep it, ignore it, breathe around it, but you can't make it vanish. A few days later, my daughter came by alone. She said she wanted to check on me. Her voice trembled, just slightly, when she asked if I was upset. Upset? I said, "No, I'm not upset. You were quiet that night." "I've been quiet most of my life." She looked around the workshop, tracing the shelves with her eyes. "It's all going to change. You know, once everything's transferred, we can modernize this place. Maybe turn it into something online. Expand." I stopped her gently. "What's the point of expanding something that's already lost its soul?" She looked at me, confused. "You sound bitter." "No," I said. "Bitter men hold grudges. I'm holding a promise." "Promise to who?" "To your mother, to myself." She didn't understand. Not yet, but she would. Before she left, she turned and said, "Dad, I really hope you're not planning anything foolish." I smiled. Foolishness depends on who's telling the story. That night, I sat by the window with a cup of tea. The street outside was dark, the kind of dark that makes you see your reflection more than what's beyond the glass. I studied my hands, calloused, scars in the same places as the wood I'd worked. Hands that had built cribs, tables, homes, dreams. Hands that had carried, repaired, forgiven. They looked tired, but not defeated. There's a dignity in hands like these, a quiet record of everything given and everything taken. And for the first time, I realized that maybe the betrayal wasn't about greed. Maybe it was about forgetting. Maybe, in their pursuit of something bigger, they forgot that everything begins small, with a hammer, a nail, a lesson, a hand reaching out to teach. Still, forgetting doesn't erase responsibility, and love, no matter how deep, doesn't demand blind submission. In the days that followed, I prepared the paperwork with the lawyer. We met in secret, often in the back room of his office, where the smell of old books and ink made me feel oddly at peace. He'd say, "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" And every time, I'd answer, "More sure than I've ever been." But it wasn't revenge I wanted. Revenge burns fast. What I wanted was revelation. I wanted them to see the cost of their arrogance, the emptiness of their laughter. I wanted them to confront the echo they'd created. The lawyer understood. He'd seen families destroy each other over less. He once said, "The cruelest punishment in this world is realizing what you threw away too late." I nodded. "Then let them realize." I spent one last morning in the workshop before the dinner. I ran my hands along the walls, feeling every dent, every groove. I whispered to the room, "We did well." Then I closed the door. When I walked into that dinner later, they thought they were seeing an old man surrendering to time. But in truth, they were witnessing a craftsman finishing his final piece. Because some legacies aren't built from wood. They are built from silence, patience, and the steady rhythm of justice waiting its turn. There's a moment in every craftsman's life when he looks at a half-finished piece and realizes something vital. No amount of sanding will save what's crooked at its core. You can keep polishing it, pretending it's fine, but deep down you know the flaw isn't on the surface. It's in the design. That realization came to me the morning after my daughter's visit. The workshop smelled of cedar and smoke. A thin mist of sawdust floated in the light, and for a moment it looked like time itself had stopped to listen. I stood there, staring at a broken chair leg I'd been meaning to repair for weeks. The crack ran right through the grain, deep and invisible until the pressure found it. I ran my thumb over it and whispered, "That's what we are now." And then, quietly, I understood. You can't fix what refuses to hold shape, but you can rebuild. You can start again, this time with stronger wood, cleaner lines, and no room for rot. That was the morning I stopped mourning. I walked into town wearing my old brown coat, the one with sawdust still in the pockets. The street was calm, the air thick with that early chill that hints at rain. I stopped at the cafe where the lawyer liked to sit, his corner table already waiting. a cup of black coffee steaming in front of him. He looked up as I approached. "I thought you might come today." "I've made my decision," I said. "I'm not just signing papers anymore. I'm finishing something." He nodded slowly, reading the tone in my voice. "Then let's do it properly." We went over the documents, line by line. The deed transfers, the trust account, the beneficiary clause that would make my children's eyes widen when they realized what I'd done. He said, "You understand what this means. They'll fight it. They'll say you were manipulated, unfit, whatever they can." "I know," I said, "but truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to stand still long enough to be seen." When we finished, he gathered the papers into a neat folder. "Who's the new heir?" I smiled faintly. "Someone they overlooked. Someone who's been here all along." He didn't ask who. The best kind of friends never do. On my way home, I stopped by the hardware store. I didn't need anything in particular, but walking those aisles with glue, varnish, the smell of steel and oil felt like walking through my own memories. I bought a single brass plate. When the clerk asked what it was for, I said, "A final signature." He looked confused, but I just smiled. Back home, I cleaned the kitchen, polished the table, checked the lighting. Every movement felt ceremonial, deliberate. There's something sacred about preparation when every small act becomes a kind of prayer. By the time I sat down again, the decision had settled in me like calm after a storm. The pain was still there, but it no longer ruled me. It was part of the design now, a necessary knot in the wood. That evening, the eldest called. His tone was sharp, impatient. "Dad, about the property, you really should let us handle the paperwork. It's complicated." "Complicated?" I asked. "It's just a house." "It's not just a house. It's an asset. You can't imagine how much I can imagine just fine," I said. "I built it." He sighed. "You're being stubborn again." "Maybe," I said, "but I've earned the right to be. You're making things difficult for us." "For you," I corrected, "not us." There was a pause, a crackle on the line, then a final scoff before he hung up. I sat there, phone in hand, listening to the dial tone fade. I felt no anger, just a quiet kind of resolve, the kind that comes when you realize you've already been dismissed, and that gives you the freedom to act without permission. The next day, I walked to the old community center on the edge of town. Years ago, I'd helped rebuild its roof after a storm tore it apart. The director, a kind woman with silver hair and tired eyes, greeted me like an old friend. "I haven't seen you here in ages," she said. "I've been busy losing things," I told her. She smiled sadly. "It happens to the best of us." I looked around the hall, children painting, volunteers repairing old toys, a few teenagers sweeping the floor. "Do you still take donations?" I asked. "Always," she said. "Even buildings?" She laughed, thinking I was joking. But when she saw I wasn't, her hand went to her chest. "You can't mean your home." I nodded. "And the shop? I want it all to go here. A place that builds, not breaks." She started to cry. I told her not to. "You're not taking it from me," I said. "You're inheriting the story." That was the breaking point, not the laughter, not the betrayal, but that moment of giving. I realized then that revenge, in its purest form, doesn't always look like destruction. Sometimes it looks like preservation. Sometimes the sharpest justice is done in silence, by giving what others tried to steal, to someone who truly deserves it. That night, I carved one last thing, a small wooden box. Simple, square, polished until it gleamed. Inside, I placed a note and the brass plate I'd bought earlier. On the plate, I engraved a single word, "Remember Dot," because that's what they'd lost, the ability to remember where they came from, what hands had built their comfort. The dinner invitation went out the next morning, handwritten, formal, sealed with the same wax I'd used for my workshop receipts 30 years ago. It read, "Dinner at the house, Friday at 7. Bring nothing but your appetite. Desserts on me." I knew they'd come. Greed is punctual. For the rest of the week, I worked quietly. The shop hummed again, though this time, it wasn't for business. It was for closure. I sanded old beams, fixed the hinges on the back door, repainted the porch rail. Every brushstroke felt like forgiveness in motion. When you've been hurt deeply, the temptation is to break everything that reminds you of the wound. But there's a different kind of strength in tending to the same places that betrayed you, keeping them whole, even when the people attached to them aren't. On Thursday, the lawyer stopped by. "Everything's ready," he said. "Once you sign this last page, it's final." I took the pen. It felt heavier than it should. He hesitated. "You sure about not telling them before dinner? It could spare you a scene." I shook my head. "No, some truths need an audience." He smiled faintly. "You're not half as meek as they think." "I've just learned that silence isn't surrender," I said. "It's strategy." That night, I rehearsed nothing. I didn't need to. Life had already written the script. I sat on the porch, watching the town lights flicker in the distance. Somewhere down the road, I could hear a train. I thought about time, how it moves forward. No matter who's ready, how it doesn't wait for apologies. When I finally went inside, I placed a small wooden box on the center of the dining table. Next to it, I set the lawyer's folder, sealed and waiting. The air in the house felt still, dense with meaning. I walked from room to room, touching the walls, the furniture, the photos. My wife's smile from behind the glass seemed to approve. "You'd have loved this part," I whispered. "They'll never see it coming." The day of the dinner arrived. I woke early, made coffee, and stood by the window as the first light hit the yard. The world outside was ordinary: birds, cars, the soft hum of a lawnmower somewhere. But inside, everything pulsed with purpose. I spent the afternoon cooking roast lamb, her favorite recipe, the one she used to make on anniversaries. The smell filled the house, warm and nostalgic. I wanted the evening to start beautifully, that way. When truth arrived, it would cut cleanly through comfort by 6:30. The table was set, candles, silverware, the wooden box at the center. The lawyer would arrive soon. I stood there for a while, looking at the empty chairs, remembering who they used to be. Children with jam-stained fingers, racing through the halls, laughing without greed. For a brief moment, I almost wavered. I thought about calling it off, pretending it didn't matter. But then I remembered the sound of their laughter, that hollow, practiced sound that night when they called me broke. That laughter was the lock. This dinner would be the key. When the clock struck 7, the doorbell rang. I took a slow breath, straightened my collar, and opened the door. They entered with smiles, gifts, and expensive cologne. The same table that once united us would soon divide us. But I wasn't angry anymore. I was ready, because sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't to destroy someone, it's to make them watch what real integrity looks like. And when dessert would come, they'd see it not in the sweetness of the pie, but in the truth that was about to be served beside it. The morning of the dinner felt like a pause in the rhythm of the world, the kind of silence that exists just before a storm changes direction. The town woke as usual, dogs barking, mail truck passing, the smell of rain-soaked earth mixing with morning coffee. But inside my house, everything felt suspended, as if the walls themselves were waiting for something to happen. I moved through the rooms slowly, like a man preparing a chapel for one last prayer. Every movement deliberate, every sound meaningful. There's something sacred about calm before consequence. It is in those quiet hours that a man decides not just what he will do, but who he will be when it's done. The lawyer called mid-morning. His voice was steady. "Everything's arranged," he said. "I'll arrive just before dessert. You won't need to say much. The documents will speak for you." "Good," I said. "Let truth do the talking." He chuckled softly. "You really have no anger left in you, do you?" "I used to," I said, "but anger burns what's left of the good. But I'm only polishing now." By noon, I had begun preparing the meal, not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because the ritual of cooking always steadied my hands. Lamb, potatoes, fresh herbs from the garden. My wife used to hum while seasoning food, little tunes that only existed in the kitchen. I hummed them now, not for memory's sake, but for courage. The table was set by 2 o'clock. White cloth, silver cutlery, crystal glasses, the same china we'd bought on our 10th anniversary. Every piece had a chip or a hairline crack, but I left them. Flaws make a table honest. I placed the wooden box at the center, its brass plate glinting faintly in the light. Around it, I arranged 3 candles, one for what was built, one for what was broken, one for what would be rebuilt. Then I opened the windows, let the autumn air roll in, carrying the scent of pine and faraway rain. Everything had to feel familiar, so they wouldn't notice that the air had changed. Around 4, my daughter called. Her voice was warm, rehearsed. "Dad, we'll be there right on time. Do you need us to bring anything?" "Just yourselves," I said. "We're looking forward to it." "I know," I replied. "So am I." When I hung up, I looked at the clock. 3 hours left. 3 hours to reflect on a lifetime of devotion that had led to this single evening. I walked out to the porch and sat in the old rocking chair. The sky had begun to turn gold. I could see the faint shimmer of the lake from here. My hands rested on my knees, calloused, quiet. It was strange, feeling both heavy and light at once. Heavy with history, light with release. When you build for a living, you learn the art of waiting. Paint needs to dry, wood needs to settle. Patience becomes your second skin. And in that patience, justice takes root. This dinner wasn't about punishment. It was about demonstration, about showing them, without cruelty, what they had chosen to forget. The lesson would not be shouted. It would be served. At 6:30, I changed my shirt, combed my hair, and polished my shoes. A craftsman should always finish his work with care, no matter how small the detail. The smell of roasted lamb filled the house. It mixed with the faint scent of varnish from the workshop next door. To me, that smell had always been home. Wood and warmth, labor and grace. When the doorbell rang, I didn't flinch. I stood, straightened my collar, and opened the door with the calm of a man who had already made peace with every outcome. My daughter entered first, holding a bottle of wine she hadn't paid for herself. Behind her came the eldest, his suit sharp, but his smile sharper. His wife followed, perfumed and polite. They looked around the house like tourists visiting a place they no longer recognized. "Smells wonderful," my daughter said, kissing my cheek. "It does," said the eldest, patting my shoulder. "Look at you, Dad, still doing everything yourself." "Old habits," I said. "Come in." We sat. The conversation flowed, light and meaningless. They talked about their new ventures, about property, about friends with boats and cars. I listened, nodding when required, answering when polite. Underneath their words, I could hear something else, a hum of greed disguised as progress. Every phrase carried the tone of people who had forgotten the soil. Beneath their own success, the eldest spoke of expansion plans for the business, how modernizing would bring in more investors. My daughter mentioned tax strategies, portfolio diversification. I asked a few questions, simple ones I already knew the answers to. "So," I said, slicing the lamb, "how are you both handling the company finances these days?" The eldest smiled confidently. "We've streamlined everything. Automated payroll, digital invoicing, even client tracking. You'd barely recognize it." "I bet," I said. "And what about craftsmanship? Still hand finishing the tables?" He laughed. "Dad, no one does that anymore. Machines can do it faster and cleaner." "Faster, maybe," I said softly. "Cleaner, I'm not so sure." He didn't hear me, or maybe he chose not to. As the evening went on, the air grew heavier. The small talk began to stumble. My daughter's laughter turned brittle. Her husband kept checking his watch. At 7:30, the lawyer arrived, just as planned. He entered quietly, removing his hat as he stepped inside. "Ah," I said, standing, "right on time." The eldest looked surprised. "What's this about, Dad? You didn't tell us we'd have company." I smiled. "He's not company. He's family business." The lawyer nodded politely. "Please, don't let me interrupt dinner. I'll just wait." "No interruption," I said. "We're just about to serve dessert." When I brought the apple pie from the kitchen, the aroma seemed to still the air. The golden crust, the cinnamon, every detail, intentional. Sweetness before truth. I set it on the table beside the wooden box. The eldest leaned forward. "What's this?" "Something I wanted to share," I said. "It won't take long." I looked at the lawyer. Would you, please? He opened his briefcase, removed a stack of papers bound neatly with a ribbon, and cleared his throat. My client, he began, has requested that these documents be read in the presence of his family. The eldest laughed nervously. Dad, come on. What is this? A will. You're not dying, are you? No, I said, just finishing a job. The lawyer began to read. His voice filled the room, clear and firm. By this agreement, all assets under the ownership of the undersigned, namely, the residence at Maple Avenue and the property known as the Family Craft Company, are hereby transferred in full to the Community Arts and Learning Center, effective immediately upon filing. For a moment, there was silence so deep I could hear the clock ticking. Then came the disbelief. What? The eldest said, half rising from his chair. You can't be serious. It's legal, the lawyer said, calm as a winter stream. Signed and notarized last week. My daughter's fork slipped from her hand, clattering against the plate. You gave everything away, she whispered. Not gave, I said. Returned. Returned to who? To the people it was built for. The eldest's face turned red. You've lost your mind. That's our inheritance. No, I said gently. It's my legacy, and there's a difference. He slammed his hand on the table. You had no right. I had every right, I said. I built it. Every nail, every beam, every client, every name written in that ledger. You were supposed to inherit meaning, not money, but you turned it into profit margins. I won't let that be the final shape of my life's work. My daughter started crying, not from sadness, but confusion. Dad, we just wanted to help. You wanted to control, I said softly. There's a difference there, too. The room grew thick with silence. Finally, I stood and placed my hand on the wooden box. There's one more thing. I opened it slowly. Inside, the brass plate gleamed under the candlelight. I turned it toward them. The single word etched into it caught their eyes. Remember, I said, because forgetting is how we got here. The eldest's wife rose suddenly. You're making a fool of yourself, she hissed. I looked at her calmly. No, just finishing a lesson. The lawyer closed his folder. That concludes the reading. I poured myself a small glass of wine and sat down again. You should eat your dessert, I said quietly. It's still warm. No one moved. The only sound was the wind outside and the faint crackle of the candles. When the lawyer left later that night, he shook my hand firmly. You did it right, he said, with grace. I nodded. Justice shouldn't have teeth. It should have balance. He smiled. They'll remember this night forever. I hope so, I said. Memory is what saves people when pride can't. When they finally left, no one said goodbye. Their footsteps faded down the porch steps, out into the cool night. The door clicked shut behind them, and the house felt heavier, but clean. I sat for a while at the table, looking at the empty plates, the flickering candles, the open window where the wind moved the curtains like quiet applause. There was no triumph in me, no joy. Just peace, the kind that comes after years of holding something too heavy and finally setting it down. The inheritance of dignity, once lost, had been reclaimed. And as I blew out the last candle, I whispered, let them remember. They didn't speak to me for days after that dinner. For a time, the house returned to silence, though it was a new kind, emptier, yet cleaner, like a space that had been aired out after years of stale air. I would walk through the rooms in the mornings and feel the quiet settle around me, not as loneliness, but as truth, finally taking its rightful place. The morning after the dinner, the table still held its aftermath, forks askew, glasses half full, candle wax hardened into uneven rivers. I didn't clean it right away. I wanted to see it as it was evidence of closure. Outside, the sky was pale and gentle. The world, indifferent to drama, continued on. Birds sang. The wind moved through the trees. The same ordinary beauty I had always trusted remained. That's the thing about justice. Done in silence. The world doesn't notice it, but the soul does. By noon, I went down to the workshop. The smell of cedar greeted me like an old friend. Dust hung in the beams of light like golden threads. For the first time in years, I didn't come to build or repair. I came to rest. I ran my hand over the table saw, the bench, the wood shavings. All of them bore the same patience that had carried me through life. My wife's photograph hung above the tool rack. Her smile as soft as the day I met her. I did it, I said aloud. Her eyes, frozen in that photo, seemed to understand. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't curse. I didn't destroy. I simply returned everything to where it belonged. And as I stood there, I realized the revenge hadn't been about them at all. It had been about me, about reclaiming peace in the only language I knew, the stillness of work well done. 3 days later, the eldest called. His tone was colder this time, controlled but trembling underneath. We need to talk. We already did, I said. Not like this. You blindsided us. You embarrassed us. Embarrassment, I said, is just honesty catching up to pride. You gave away our future. No, I replied. I gave away your illusion of ownership. You can't undo it, he snapped. I don't want to. He was silent for a long moment, then said, You've made enemies of your own children. I sighed. If my children see justice as betrayal, they made that choice themselves. The line went quiet. When he finally spoke again, his voice was smaller. Why, Dad? Why did you do it? Because, I said, I'd rather my life's work feed 100 strangers than poison to hearts I once loved. Then I hung up. The news spread through the town within a week. In small towns, secrets don't walk, they run. Some called me generous. Others called me foolish. People stopped me in the grocery store, at the diner, at the church steps. Is it true? They asked. You gave it all away. I'd smile and answer, not gave past forward. They didn't always understand, but they respected it, and slowly, the community center began its transformation. I would pass by in the evenings and see the lights on, children painting on tables that once stood in my shop. The same tools I'd used to build furniture were now being used to teach craft classes to kids who had never held a hammer before. That, I thought, was legacy, not inheritance, but continuation. That one afternoon, the director invited me to see the renovations. The main hall smelled of sawdust and new beginnings. The sign above the door, Read the Workshop, carved in the same script I had used on my business sign decades earlier. She smiled when she saw me. They insisted on keeping your name, said it was part of the story. I walked through the room slowly, touching the freshly sanded tables. Each one bore a small brass plate at the corner. When I looked closer, I saw the word etched there. Remember. She noticed my surprise. The kids found that word in a box you donated. They wanted it everywhere. They said it felt like a message. I couldn't speak for a moment. The word I had once carved out of heartbreak had become a lesson for others. That's when I knew that justice, when done right, doesn't end with correction. It plants something better in its place. But not everyone saw it that way. My daughter showed up at the house one evening, rain falling hard against the windows. She stood in the doorway, soaked, eyes swollen from crying. Can I come in? She asked. I stepped aside. She sat at the table, the same one where the truth had been served, and looked around like she was seeing the house for the first time. I can't sleep, she said. I keep thinking about that night, about what you said. I poured her tea and waited. She took a deep breath. I didn't mean to hurt you. I just thought we were doing what was right, making things easier for you. Sometimes, I said, people mistake control for care. You weren't helping me. You were trying to reshape me into something that fit your plans. She lowered her eyes. You're right. No, I said softly. I'm just honest. Tears slid down her cheeks. The center is beautiful. I went there today. I saw the children. They were building birdhouses. They said you taught them. I showed them how to measure, without rulers. I said with a faint smile. Sometimes it's better to learn by feel. She nodded slowly, understanding. I'm proud of you, she whispered. I reached across the table and took her hand. You don't have to be proud. Just be kind. That's all I ever wanted from you both. For the first time in years, she squeezed my hand back. A week later, I received a letter from the eldest. The envelope was thick, his handwriting heavy. I didn't open it right away. I placed it on the mantel beside my wife's photograph and let it sit there for a day. When I finally unfolded the paper, the words were stiff, uncertain. He wrote that he couldn't understand why I'd done it, that he felt humiliated, betrayed, abandoned, but beneath his anger, there were lines that trembled with something new reflection. He said he visited the community center. He saw the new carpentry program, the laughter, the way the children touched the wood as if it had stories to tell. And then, almost as if it hurt to admit it, he wrote, "Maybe you were right. Maybe it's not about ownership. Maybe it's about memory." That line, more than any apology, filled the hollow inside me that night. The following Sunday, I attended the center's open house. The hall was alive with sound hammers tapping, laughter echoing, saws humming softly. There was music too, someone playing a guitar near the entrance. A boy approached me, maybe 10 years old, his hands smudged with dust. "Are you the man who built this?" he asked. I smiled. "I built the pieces. You're the ones who build the rest." He grinned and held up a crooked little wooden box. "It's not straight," he said. I looked at it closely. "No, it's not, but you built it with care, and that's what makes it perfect." He beamed in that moment. I realized that the laughter I'd once heard at that dinner table, the cruel kind, had been replaced by another kind entirely. Honest laughter. Free laughter. The kind that heals. A few months passed. Seasons shifted. The leaves turned gold, then brown, then disappeared altogether. My daughter began visiting often. Sometimes she brought groceries. Sometimes she just sat on the porch with me in silence. We didn't talk about money or business anymore. We talked about her children, her garden, the books she'd started reading again. The eldest took longer. Pride, like oak, takes years to bend. But one morning, I saw him standing at the edge of the yard. He didn't walk up, just stood there, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the house. I nodded to him. He nodded back. That was enough. Forgiveness doesn't always arrive as a conversation. Sometimes it's just a glance that says, "I see you now." One afternoon, the lawyer stopped by again. He was older too, though his eyes still carried the same quiet humor. "You've become somewhat of a legend in this town," he said, smiling. "Everyone's talking about the man who outsmarted greed with generosity." I laughed softly. "It wasn't outsmarting, it was outlasting." He nodded. "And that's the better kind." We talked for a while about life, about how small acts ripple through generations. Before he left, he said, "You know, they'll never forget you here. The name, the lesson, it'll stay." I smiled. Then it was worth every splinter. That night, as dusk settled over the house, I stepped outside. The air was cool, the stars patient and silent above. I looked at my hands again, those same hands that had built, lost, and rebuilt. They no longer trembled. I thought about the dinner, the laughter, the betrayal, the papers, the word remember. Every step, every silence, every small decision had led to this peace. The house behind me no longer felt like a possession. It felt like a witness stood in the window. My wife's photograph caught the last of the fading light. For a moment, I imagined her voice saying, "You finished it right." And I smiled. Sometimes, justice doesn't roar. It whispers. It doesn't strike hard. It simply endures until truth rises to the surface. That's what this was. A lifetime of work distilled into one act of restoration. My children had laughed once, thinking they were mocking failure. But what they didn't see was that humility can be the sharpest kind of wisdom. That because the moment you stop chasing what's yours, you start protecting what's sacred. And that's what I did. So when people ask me now if I regretted giving it all away, losing comfort for peace, I tell them no. I didn't lose anything. I simply stopped mistaking weight for worth. The house, the shop, the business, they were chapters. I closed them with steady hands. The legacy lives elsewhere now, in laughter that's honest and work that continues. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, I still sit at the same table where the truth was served. A cup of tea cooling beside me, the air filled with the faint scent of wood and forgiveness. That's when I whisper to myself. They laughed before the dessert arrived, but in the end, the sweetest thing served that night was clarity. If you've watched this far, tell me, what would you have done in my place? Would you have shouted, walked away, Or would you have done what I did? Let silence and patience build the final masterpiece. Comment below, share your thoughts, and if you believe justice can be quiet yet powerful, like this story, like this man's lesson, then like this video, and subscribe for more stories that remind us what integrity truly looks like. Because sometimes, revenge doesn't destroy, it rebuilds. And that, in the end, is the only kind worth having.